the silent warning. The conference chamber aboard Unity's crown stretched wide enough to accommodate a dozen different species, each requiring their own atmospheric preferences and gravitational settings. Holographic displays flickered above the central table, showing star charts marked with ominous red zones where entire systems had gone dark. The silence was heavy, broken only by the subtle hum of life support systems working overtime to maintain the delicate balance needed for this unprecedented gathering. Commander Elena Torres sat at the far end of the massive table, her simple, gray uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial armor and flowing robes surrounding her. She kept her hands folded, her expression neutral, and her mouth shut. Around her, the greatest military minds of the Galactic Alliance debated with voices that echoed through translation matrices, each species adding their own linguistic flourishes to what was essentially an argument about who would lead the charge against humanity's greatest threat. Admiral Zexathul of the Korthani hegemony rose from his crystalline throne, his exoskeleton catching the chamber's light and throwing rainbow patterns across the ceiling. His species had ruled space lanes for over 2 millennia, and every gesture he made carried the weight of that authority. When he spoke, his voice resonated through harmonic frequencies that made the air itself seem to vibrate with importance. The Void Swarm approaches the Kepler Nebula within 72 standard hours, he announced, his mandibles clicking in rhythm with his words. Our intelligence networks confirm they have consumed the Rigel system completely. No survivors, no debris, nothing but empty space where 3 billion souls once thrived. His 6 eyes turned toward the holographic display, where pulsing red indicators showed the enemy's predicted path. The Korthani First Armada stands ready to meet them with the full might of our plasma lance technology. We have faced every threat the galaxy has produced for 20 centuries. This will be no different. General Vrakmor of the Thraxian war clan slammed all 4 of his massive fists onto the table simultaneously, causing several smaller species to jump in their seats. His scarred hide bore the marks of 100 battles, and his tusks were carved with victory notches that told stories of conquered worlds. The Korthani speak of plasma lances while real warriors know that victory comes from close combat, he growled, his voice like grinding stone. Thraxian battle cruisers will ram through their formations and tear them apart with kinetic weapons. We have never retreated, never surrendered, never shown mercy to any enemy. The Void Swarm will learn why our war cries echo across the galaxy. High Strategist Yilneth of the Selenian Collective gracefully extended one silver-skinned hand, and the chaotic voices gradually fell silent. Her people were telepaths and philosophers, and their mere presence seemed to calm the aggressive posturing that had filled the chamber. When she spoke, her words carried multiple layers of meaning that the translation systems struggled to convey fully. Honored warriors, she began, her voice like silk over steel. Perhaps we should consider the nature of this enemy before we decide how to destroy them. The Void Swarm appears to consume not just matter and energy, but information itself. They leave behind regions of space that our sensors cannot penetrate, where the very laws of physics seem altered. This suggests adaptive capabilities beyond our previous experience. Torres shifted slightly in her chair, just enough to draw attention without seeming aggressive. She had been analyzing the data from the consumed systems for weeks, running probability matrices and tactical simulations that painted a very different picture than what the aliens were discussing. But she had learned over her 5 years with the Alliance that speaking too soon often meant not being heard at all. Admiral Zexthul's attention turned toward her, his crystalline features reflecting curiosity rather than respect. Commander Torres, your species has been part of this alliance for less than a decade. While we appreciate Earth's enthusiasm for joining our cause, perhaps it would be wise to observe how experienced civilizations handle galactic threats. The dismissal was polite, but absolute. Torres felt the familiar sting of being treated like a junior officer, despite holding the rank of strategic commander in the Human Defense Force. Her species was young by galactic standards, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, but they had brought something to the Alliance that none of the elder races seemed to recognize, a different way of thinking about warfare. With respect, Admiral, Torres said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite its low volume. "I've reviewed the tactical data from all 3 consumed systems. The Void Swarm doesn't engage in traditional combat. They adapt their approach based on whatever defense they encounter. At Rigel, they absorb the Centaurian fleet's energy weapons and use that same energy to power their own assault. At Vega Prime, they analyzed the hegemony's defensive formations and systematically dismantled them using the Defender's own tactical doctrine against them." General Vrakmore's laugh boomed through the chamber like a rock slide. "Humans and their theories. You speak of adaptation as if it matters when faced with superior firepower. The Thraxian way is simple. Hit harder than your enemy can hit back. No amount of adaptation can overcome raw destructive force applied with absolute commitment. The issue," Torres continued, her tone remaining level despite the interruption, "is that traditional massed formations give the swarm exactly what they need: predictable patterns to analyze and counter. Every previous engagement has followed classical space warfare doctrine. The enemy learns from each encounter and becomes more effective. What we need," interrupted High Strategist Yilnith with just enough telepathic pressure to make Torres pause mid-sentence, "is unity of command and proven strategies. The Selenian Collective has modeled 17 different engagement scenarios using our most advanced probability engines. The optimal approach combines Corthani long-range superiority with Thraxian close-quarters expertise, coordinated through Selenian tactical networks. Human forces can provide support roles once the primary engagement begins." Torres felt her jaw tighten, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. Support roles. After everything humanity had contributed to the Alliance, after all the unconventional solutions they had provided to seemingly impossible problems, they were still being relegated to the sidelines when it truly mattered. She glanced at the holographic display, where the Void Swarm's projected path cut through space like a cancer, and made a decision that would change the course of the coming battle. "Understood," she said simply, her voice betraying nothing of the storm building behind her calm exterior. "Earth's forces will await your orders." The meeting continued for another 3 hours, with detailed discussions of fleet positioning, communication protocols, and supply line management. Torres participated when directly asked, provided the requested logistical data about human ship capabilities, and generally played the role of the junior partner in a coalition dominated by species that had been fighting wars when Earth was still discovering fire. But while the aliens debated the finer points of their grand strategy, Torres was running very different calculations in her head. She thought about asymmetric warfare, about the lessons learned in Earth's own bloody history when smaller, more flexible forces had defeated seemingly superior enemies. She considered the psychological profiles of species that had never faced an opponent they couldn't understand or categorize, and what might happen when their certainty collided with something genuinely alien. As the meeting finally adjourned, Torres remained seated while the other commanders filed out in order of precedence. Admiral Zexthul paused beside her chair, his crystalline features showing what might have been concern or condescension. "Commander Torres," he said, his harmonic voice softer now, "I hope you understand that our caution comes from experience, not disrespect. Your species shows great promise, but this enemy requires the wisdom of ages, not the enthusiasm of youth." Torres stood slowly, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. "I understand completely, Admiral. Earth will do its part when the time comes." After the chamber emptied, Torres activated her personal communication device and established a quantum-encrypted link to Earth. The face that appeared in the holographic display was weathered and scarred, belonging to Admiral Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had built humanity's space navy from nothing and turned it into a force that could hold its own among the stars. "Elena," Mitchell said without preamble, "I watched the entire meeting through your feed. Please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve watching our allies get slaughtered." "I have a plan," Torres replied, her calm mask finally slipping to reveal the intensity beneath. "But they won't like it, and we're going to have to act without Alliance approval." "What do you need?" Torres pulled up her own tactical displays, showing ship movements and positioning data that painted a very different picture than the grand formations the aliens were planning. I need every stealth ship we have, all our experimental weapons and crews crazy enough to follow me into something that's never been tried before. Mitchell's scarred face split into a grin that had terrified enemies across 3 sectors. Elena, that describes our entire Navy. What's the real plan? For the next hour, Torres outlined a strategy that violated every principle of space warfare that the galactic civilizations held sacred. It was unpredictable, chaotic, and relied more on human intuition than mathematical models. It would require split-second timing, perfect coordination, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the slim chance of victory. When she finished, Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. You know this is insane, right? If you're wrong, we lose everything. Our reputation, our place in the Alliance, probably our lives. If I'm right and we do nothing, we lose everything anyway, Torres replied. The difference is that my way, we go down fighting on our own terms instead of following someone else's plan into oblivion. Mitchell nodded slowly. I'll start moving. The ship's into position. How long do we have? Torres glanced at the tactical display where the Void Swarm's approach vector cut through space like a blade aimed at the heart of civilization. 60 hours until first contact. The Alliance fleets will engage according to their plan. We'll wait and see what happens. And if they actually win? Torres's expression was grim. Then I'll accept whatever consequences come from preparing for their failure. But Admiral, they won't win. This enemy is something new, something that doesn't play by the rules we understand. And when traditional warfare fails, maybe it's time to try something completely different. The connection closed, leaving Torres alone in the vast chamber with only the holographic displays for company. She studied the tactical projections one more time, running through the variables and probabilities that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. The aliens saw patterns and formations, mathematical certainties and proven doctrines, but Torres saw something else entirely. An enemy that learned and adapted, that turned strength into weakness and order into chaos. In less than 3 days, the greatest armadas in galactic history would face an opponent unlike anything they had ever encountered. They would rely on superiority of numbers, advanced technology, and the accumulated wisdom of millennia. They would fight with honor and courage and absolute conviction that their way was the only way. And when their certainty crumbled and their fleets burned in the cold vacuum of space, a quiet human commander and her small fleet of misfits would be ready to show the galaxy that sometimes the best way to win an impossible war was to throw out every rule and trust in the one thing no computer could calculate: the unpredictable nature of human determination. When the silent strike, the Kepler Nebula had been beautiful once, a swirling tapestry of gas and newborn stars that painted space in shades of gold and crimson. Now it served as a graveyard, scattered with the debris of what had been the most powerful fleet in galactic history. Twisted metal drifted past Torres's viewport, fragments of Corthani plasma cannons and Thraxian battle armor, spinning slowly in the vacuum where their owners had died believing in the invincibility of tradition. Torres stood in the cramped bridge of the stealth ship Phantom's Edge, watching the tactical displays that told the story of the Alliance's defeat with cold mathematical precision. The battle had lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. The Void Swarm had analyzed their opponent's formations, adapted to their weapons, and systematically dismantled every ship with the efficiency of a virus consuming healthy cells. Captain Chen, report, Torres said quietly into her communication headset, her voice betraying nothing of the grief that threatened to overwhelm her as she watched rescue beacons flicker and die in the darkness. Captain Marcus Chen's voice crackled through the quantum link from his position aboard the stealth cruiser silent running. All human vessels are in position, Commander. We have 17 ships total, not counting the suicide drones. The swarm is holding position at the nebula's edge, probably analyzing the wreckage and integrating whatever they learned from the engagement. Torres nodded, though Chen couldn't see her. The human fleet was tiny compared to what had just been destroyed, but size had never been humanity's advantage. They had survived in a galaxy of superior civilizations by being unpredictable, adaptable, and willing to take risks that other species considered insane. "What's the status on our survivors from the Alliance fleet?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "We've picked up maybe 3,000 beings from escape pods. Admiral Zexthul is aboard the medical ship Mercy's Call, along with about 50 other Korthani officers. General Vrakmor didn't make it off his flagship. High strategist Yilneth is in a medically induced coma after suffering telepathic feedback from watching her entire species battle network collapse in real time." Torres closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the weight of what had happened. Billions of lives lost because pride and tradition had mattered more than listening to a different perspective. But grief was a luxury she couldn't afford now, not when the Void Swarm was already moving toward the inner systems where trillions more waited to die. "Patch me through to Admiral Zexthul," she said. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the crystalline features of the Korthani commander. His exoskeleton was cracked in several places, and one of his 6 eyes had gone dark, but his voice still carried the resonance of command authority. "Commander Torres," he said, the harmonic frequencies of his speech distorted by pain. "I owe you an apology. Your warnings were accurate. The enemy adapts faster than our tactical models predicted. They learned from every weapon we fired, every formation we used. By the end, they were using our own strategies against us with perfect execution. Admiral, I need to know everything you observed about their adaptation patterns. Every detail might save lives." Zexthul's remaining eyes focused on something beyond the display. "They don't just analyze tactics, Commander. They consume information itself, including the psychological profiles of their opponents. Near the end, they were predicting our movements before we made them, as if they understood not just our capabilities but our intentions. It was unsettling to face an enemy that knew us better than we knew ourselves." Torres felt a chill run down her spine. If the swarm could read and predict behavior patterns, then any conventional strategy would fail before it began. But that assumption also revealed a potential weakness, one that humanity might be uniquely positioned to exploit. "Admiral, I'm going to ask something that may sound insane, but I need you to trust me. Can you patch me through to all surviving Alliance personnel?" Within minutes, Torres found herself addressing nearly 3,000 survivors representing a dozen different species, all crammed into human rescue ships that had never been designed for such diversity. She looked at their faces on the display, seeing fear, despair, and the kind of shock that came from watching everything you believed in crumble to ash. "I know what you've been through," she began, her voice carrying clearly despite the low volume. "I know you've lost friends, family, entire fleets. I know you're wondering how anything could have stopped what just happened. But I also know something else. The enemy made a mistake. They learned everything about how galactic civilizations fight wars, but they never encountered anything like human warfare doctrine because we've never been allowed to demonstrate it on this scale." A Korthani officer, his exoskeleton bearing the scars of recent battle, raised a trembling limb. "Commander, with respect, your 17 ships cannot accomplish what our 1,000-vessel armada could not. The mathematics are impossible." Torres nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right if we fight the way you just fought. But humans learned warfare on a planet where the weak survived by being unpredictable, where guerrilla tactics defeated superior armies, where victory came not from strength but from doing what your enemy never expected. We're going to teach the Void Swarm what it means to face an opponent that doesn't follow any pattern they can analyze." Over the next 6 hours, Torres outlined a strategy that horrified the alien survivors. Human ships would operate independently, with no central command structure and no predictable patterns. They would use psychological warfare, sacrificial tactics, and coordinated chaos to create a battlefield where adaptation became impossible because there was nothing consistent to adapt to. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the youngest pilot in the human fleet, raised her hand during the briefing. "Commander, this plan requires perfect timing with no communication between ships once we engage. How do we coordinate 17 different strategies simultaneously?" Torres smiled, the expression both confident and terrifying. "We don't coordinate, Lieutenant. That's the point. Each ship will act according to human instinct and training, but not according to any plan the enemy can predict. We'll be like a swarm of insects attacking a giant. Individually weak, but collectively impossible to defend against because we refuse to be predictable. The battle began 18 hours later as the Void Swarm moved toward the Proxima system, where 8 billion beings waited for salvation that wasn't coming. The human fleet emerged from the nebula not in formation, but as scattered individual ships, each approaching from a different vector at a different speed with different intentions. Torres watched from the Phantom's edge as the swarm immediately began analyzing the incoming threats, their biomechanical forms shifting and adapting to counter what appeared to be a chaotic attack pattern. But chaos was exactly what humans did best. Captain Chen's silent running opened fire first, launching not weapons but modified cargo containers filled with scrap metal and electromagnetic chaff. The swarm entities moved to intercept what appeared to be kinetic projectiles, only to discover they were dealing with sensor decoys that accomplished nothing except wasting their attention. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Kim's fighter squadron approached from the opposite direction, broadcasting what appeared to be surrender signals while actually guiding smart minds into optimal positions. When the swarm moved to capture what they interpreted as defecting vessels, the mines detonated in patterns that had no tactical value except to create confusion and obscure sensor readings. The Phantom's edge dove straight into the heart of the swarm formation, broadcasting human music at maximum volume across all frequencies while launching everything from nuclear weapons to garbage. The enemy entities tried to analyze the attack pattern, but there was no pattern to analyze, only the chaotic expression of a species that had never learned to fight fair. Torres watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction as the Void Swarm began to show signs of something they had never experienced before: confusion. They had consumed the knowledge of a dozen civilizations, but every civilization they had encountered fought according to logical principles that could be understood and countered. Humans fought according to instinct, emotion, and a willingness to die for causes that made no mathematical sense. The battle raged for 3 hours, with human ships appearing and disappearing like ghosts, striking when least expected, and vanishing before effective retaliation could be organized. They used tactics that violated every principle of space warfare: ramming attacks with empty ships, broadcast deception that served no purpose except to waste enemy processing power, and weapons that accomplished nothing except to prevent the swarm from establishing any predictable patterns to counter. But the cost was terrible. Torres watched ship after ship disappear from her tactical display, each one representing friends and comrades who had volunteered for a mission they knew was suicide. The mathematics were still impossible. 17 ships could not defeat an enemy that had consumed entire fleets. But mathematics had never been the point. The turning came when the swarm began to retreat, not because they were defeated, but because they could not adapt to opponents who refused to be consistent. For the first time in their existence, they faced an enemy that became more dangerous when acting irrationally, that gained strength from apparent weakness, that turned chaos into a weapon no algorithm could counter. Torres made her final decision as the surviving swarm entities began to withdraw toward the edge of the system. She activated the quantum communicator one last time, broadcasting to every human ship and all the alien survivors. "This is Commander Torres. The enemy is retreating, but they'll be back with new adaptations unless we make sure they never get the chance to learn from this encounter. I'm taking the Phantom's edge on a final run to their command nexus. All other ships are to withdraw immediately and protect the survivors." Captain Chen's voice crackled through the static. "Elena, that's a one-way trip. There has to be another option." Torres looked at the tactical display, where the massive biomechanical form at the center of the swarm pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of every civilization it had consumed. "There's no other option, Marcus. Someone has to make sure they don't take what they learned here to the next system. And someone has to show them that humans don't just fight differently. We're willing to sacrifice everything for people we've never met." The Phantom's edge accelerated toward the swarm's central entity. Its engines pushed beyond safe limits as Torres programmed the final sequence. She thought about her home planet, about the quiet farms and busy cities where people lived their Lives without knowing that their survival had depended on 17 ships and crews crazy enough to fight a war no one believed they could win. The ship's hull began to glow as she pushed through the swarm's defensive perimeter, absorbing energy. Weapons that would have vaporized any conventional vessel, but the Phantom's Edge had been built for exactly this kind of mission. Its entire structure designed to deliver a single devastating payload before being destroyed. Torres activated the final protocol as enemy fire tore through her bridge. The quantum resonance warhead at the ship's core was an experimental weapon that existed in violation of several galactic treaties, something humanity had developed in secret for exactly this kind of situation. It wouldn't just destroy the swarm's command entity. It would create a cascade failure that would erase every bit of information they had collected, every adaptation they had made. The explosion lit up the Kepler Nebula like a newborn star, and when the light faded, nothing remained of the void swarm except scattered debris in the silence of deep space. The threat that had consumed 3 star systems and destroyed the greatest fleet in galactic history was gone, erased by a quiet human commander who had understood that sometimes the best way to win was to refuse to fight by anyone else's rules. 6 months later, Admiral Zexthal stood before the Galactic Council to deliver his report on the Battle of Kepler Nebula. His crystalline features reflected the memorial lights that honored the human crews who had sacrificed everything to save civilizations that had dismissed them as inexperienced newcomers. "The humans taught us something that day," he told the assembled representatives of a dozen species. "They showed us that wisdom doesn't always come from age, that experience can become a weakness when it blinds us to new possibilities. Commander Elena Torres and her crew saved us all by refusing to accept that the impossible was impossible." The Council voted unanimously to establish the Torres Doctrine as official Alliance military strategy, the principle that diversity of thought and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom were humanity's greatest contributions to galactic civilization. They also voted to ensure that human voices would never again be dismissed or relegated to support roles when the galaxy's survival was at stake. But perhaps the most fitting memorial was much simpler, a small plaque installed on every Alliance vessel, bearing the words that had become humanity's unofficial motto among the stars. "When the impossible becomes necessary, trust the humans to find a way." The galaxy was safe, not because of superior firepower or ancient wisdom, but because one species had never learned that some things couldn't be done. And in the cold beauty of space, where new stars were born from the ashes of the old, that lesson would echo through the ages as a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important truths.